down. So, all right, we're going to dig into this Torah portion. And so that we can really pay attention to some of these parallels, we'll hear some of the verses in English. I'll point out a few places where interpretation or translation differ, just in order to gain more insight into our text. And one hint, there's a lot in both stories about the idea of to see, the Shoresh Resh Aleph Hey, which means to see literally, behold, or even perceive or understand. And then also being able to have one's eyes open and see clearly, or one's eyes being unopened, closed. The divine helping open eyes is an enabler to see clearly. Just a lot about vision and seeing. So we have some people to help us. Karen and Kara. That was just by chance, people, I guess, who care. So we are starting with yesterday's reading, just a few verses. This is on page 485, and we've got Avraham basically banishing out Hagar, his sort of wife, and his son, Ishmael. So our narrator begins on 485. And they're reading from JPS, so it will sound a little different.
Early next morning, Abraham took some bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He placed them over her shoulder together with the child and sent her away. And she wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water was gone from the skin, she left the child under one of the bushes and went and sat down at a distance, a bow shot away, for she thought,
"Let me not see the child die."
And sitting thus afar, she burst into tears. God heard the cry of the boy, and an angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her,
"What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heeded the cry of the boy where he is. Come lift up the boy and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him."
Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and let the boy drink.
Thank you. So just to point out a couple of things, the word shalach, to send out or cast out, is used several times in that first verse where Abraham casts out Hagar and the boy, who's not given by name here. And then we'll see that word again with the Akedah, with the binding of Isaac. There's also this sort of assonance play, just a sounding like, two out of the three letters are the same, but they're not exactly the same shorish, where Hagar basically, vatash lech, she casts out her son under one of the bushes. So this idea of pushing away is very clear in both of these. Okay, so then our second story from today, just some verses, and this is 507 if you're looking at your book. Go ahead.
They arrived at the place of which God had told him. Abraham built an altar there. He laid out the wood. He bound his son Isaac. He laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up the knife to slay his son.
Here it's actually, he stretched out his hand. He sent his hand out, that again, shalach, to pick up this knife, just for the Hebrew.
Then an angel of the Lord called to him from heaven,
Abraham, Abraham.
And he answered,
Here I am.
and he said,
Do not raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your favored one, from me.
When Abraham looked up, his eye fell upon a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham named that site Adonai Yireh, whence the present saying, on the mount of the Lord there is vision.
Okay, so just for a little bit of language here. First of all, they arrived at the place which God had told him. What is the place? The place happens to be called Eretz Hamoriah, the land of the seeing, the land of vision. And then when this malach, as Rabbi Benjamin said, this angel or this messenger calls out, Avraham, Avraham, and he answers, here I am. Just to note, there's a lot of midrash here. Why twice? Why doesn't one time suffice? You call somebody's name at that moment. An angel calls somebody's name, you'd think they'd pay attention. But there's this idea that Abraham has to be called twice because he's so focused and intent. The first time doesn't stop him. The first time he can't absorb that there's this voice, this alternative reality happening. And there are further midrashim. These are classic. These are, thousands of years old, that has the malach having to put its hand out to stop his hand. It wasn't the call even that does it, but the hand has to stop him. And another midrash has it that the knife is actually dissolved by the malach's tears, the messenger's tears, because only that will stop Avraham. But it gets worse. There's another understanding based on these words. Do not send out your hand. Again, it's that sending out your hand against the boy or do anything to him. What's not enough with don't send out your hand against the boy? Why do you have to say and do anything to him? There's, picking up on this language, there's this idea in classical midrash, as in very old, that Avraham is so unable to stop. He is so focused on fulfilling this commandment. He's obsessed that he basically says, okay, if I can't slay him with a knife, can I strangle him? Can I set him on fire? Can I do anything else to kill him? And I mention these midrashim not because we're in the business of trying to figure out exactly what happened, because that's impossible, or if anything happened, but in telling the story over the generations, this concern with Abraham's inability to stop once this action is set in course. So, and then when Abraham, his eyes are raised, it's only when he raises his eyes. In the last, what we heard, Hagar's eyes are opened by the divine, but here Abraham, after hearing the malach say, do not do this, don't do anything, for now I know you fear Adonai, since you've not withheld your son, your favored one, from me. Then he raises his eyes, he's able to look around, and what does he see? A ram, which is the usual sacrifice, right? That is just waiting there in the thicket, stuck by its horns. So he, his eyes are what behold this particular object, which will become the sacrifice. Okay, and just to finish up.
The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said,
By myself I swear, the Lord declares, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands on the seashore, and your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes.
Okay, so here your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes with Hagar. And Ishmael, we had the prophecy which continued, which we didn't read all of, that Ishmael would become a great nation and would live amongst the Israelites and near, but there would always be enmity. There would be struggle against Ishmael and from Ishmael. So I wanted to say a little bit more about seeing before we hear from people what parallels you heard. So Abraham names this site Adonai Yireh, which means God sees. And then we get one of these, whence the present saying, on the mount of the Lord there is vision, or on Adonai's mountain it is seen. And there's this question of what is seen and who is seen, what, right? And the shorish, the word see here, because there's no vowels in the Torah, it's ambiguous. It could be he will be seen, or it will be seen, or he sees. So again, there's this question of what does God see, that Abraham says, names this site, God sees, right? And then there's this question of what is to be seen, what is to be apprehended or understood. And I do want to hearken back, if you can hang with me for a second, to the beginning of the Hagar story in chapter 16, because this is actually Hagar's second banishment or leaving this home of her masters in yesterday's reading. In the first one, she's pregnant. She has conflict with Sarah, who's treated her harshly, and Abraham, who's very passive. And she goes, and this malach again encounters her, asks what she's doing. She's reassured that indeed her son will live and become a great nation. And then she calls out to God. She names God El Roi, Adonai El Roi. You're the one who sees me. And then we hear one of these, and hence this is why this place is called Be'er Lachai Roi. This is the well of the living water. So both of these end with one of them naming either God or the place in sight, right? And this idea of the well of the living one who sees me with Hagar, or Adonai sees, the mountain where Adonai sees, in both of them. Okay, so what else do people hear? What are some parallels in these stories? In the language, in the themes, and we do have a couple microphones. Let's just hear a couple of these. Put up your hand, and maybe one of the people who is called Karen or Kara will bring you one. Yeah, Harriet. Or you can just talk really loud. No, okay, use the mic. Oh, that's right. We need that for people on Zoom. Hello, people on Zoom. Okay, let's hear a couple of parallels.
The parallel that stood out for me in both of these is that Abraham does something that looks on the surface like this is not going to go well. He's listening to God, doing something that superficially looks like this is not good, but he's listening and he does it anyway. And God makes good in both circumstances.
Thanks. What else? Yeah, Aaron.
Hi, Shana Tov, everyone. This is somewhat in the same theme, and it gets back to Rabbi Benjamin mentioned that there was a second Hineni in this chapter. That's actually the third Hineni. The second Hineni is when his son, Yaakov, says, "Father, where are you?" And then Abraham says, "Hineni." Isaac, says Hineni. So that second Hineni is really, I'm trying to sort of figure out this second Hineni in between the two. What does it mean that Abraham is responding to his son in the same way as he's responding to Adonai, Hineni? And then what comes after that is, I'm not going to close this thought or truly open it. He tells Yitzchak the truth, because Yitzchak says, "Where is the ram? Where is the?" And he says, "God will provide it." he's simply telling Yitzchak the truth right there.
I don't know about,
I think
not sure about the parenting books
Yeah.
on that one, but okay.
Yeah, I think the theme for me is I really don't get Abraham in either one of these stories. Every year I get back to the same place and I want to believe that there's something good underneath the intentions. And maybe this is just too modern day, but every year I struggle with how held up he is for both of these scenarios. And I'm not, I at 54, I'm still not buying it. So that's the theme for me. And the fact that he gets redemption at the end is also a thematic struggle that I have with both these stories, if I'm going to be honest.
Thank you. Okay,
That's my parallel.
okay, and then we'll go back there, yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to respond to that, actually. I kind of notice this time him acting a little bit different. He's distraught when he's told to, when Sarah tells him to kick Ishmael out, and he's a lot, what kind of strikes me is he's a lot more glum and numb. He's getting up early for both of them,
Yeah,
but
he's getting up early.
he's getting up early, which just,
Ready to go.
respect. But in the second one, he does seem more removed. He's intent, and I'm kind of noticing, what I noticed this time is there's a hine at the announcement of all the births, and you don't really hear that much from Abraham about it. You don't hear
Yeah,
much from, it just seems he's trained by this point.
Abraham actually says very little, right? I mean, almost nothing. Yeah, go ahead. And then we'll go back to you.
Oh, whoops. That was really loud, sorry. For me, these are both stories less about Abraham's faith and more about God's commitment to fulfilling his promise of giving Abraham a great nation. In both instances, Abraham is about to, sabotage that whole thing by killing his children, and then God steps in at the last moment and says no.
Got it. Okay, thanks, and go ahead.
Yeah, I think my reading is inflected by a lot of my life right now is caring for a developmentally disabled adult. And I look at these stories and I look at the two people who are in the authority position, Hagar and Abraham, and they're both about to kill their children.
Yep.
And we pay a lot of attention to means sometimes, but really Hagar is sitting there in the desert crying with a well in front of her that she doesn't see. And her child is dying of thirst. And she says, "Don't let me see this child die." And she can't stop crying. So she can't see the well. And that child is going to die because she can't stop crying. And then Abraham is on the mountain and he's doing what he thinks he has to do too. And God knows how it is to grieve the suffering of someone you love when you think you have to do something or you can't stop doing something. And in both of these stories, the person who's in charge is going to kill the child because they can't stop what they feel they have to do. And in that moment, in both the stories, God says to Hagar, God doesn't say, "I heard you crying." God says to Hagar, "I heard the child crying.
Right.
Open up your eyes and see the well." God doesn't say to Abraham, "I'm saving Yitzhak because you're so wonderful." He says, "Abraham, do not kill the child. You must not kill the child." And sometimes we get so wrapped up in our own role in things that we forget what it's really about.
Yeah,
It's
thank you.
not about Abraham.
Yeah.
It's not about Hagar. It's about the relationship between these two children who are close to God and the people whose task it is to help them live.
Very much. Okay, how about one more? Can we do one more, Sandra? Or, yeah. Okay, two more, short.
So this is like the most awful passages of stories I know. But one of the things I was thinking of with Abraham, when they were in Sodom and Gomorrah, and he says to God, "You're a just God. If there's 10 people in there, will you still destroy the city? Will there 5 or 1?" And he never questions this time. It's like his son. He's like, and in that case, he was like, "Are you a just God? Are you going to kill these 60 good people?" But he never says, wait a minute. And I struggled deeply with that, and will continue to, I'm sure, and learn.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Well, I just want to step back for a moment and think about it from Ishmael's point of view, because in the Akedah, everybody wants it to be their son who was sacrificed. The Muslims say it was Ishmael. The Christians then go on with Jesus. It's that same story. So it's, boy, what is that theme, right? And then maybe, a lot of years ago, maybe 15, 16 years ago, I did a devar on this portion with, in collaboration with a woman from Bilal Mosque. And I was being Sarah and apologizing, and as Hagar, she said, "Don't apologize for what you've done, because that's where our story begins." So that's all I'll say.
Another mystery. Thank you for bringing that up, because I was interested to read about how in the Quran there is a son who's about to be killed by Abraham, although without a name. And then there's a lot of discussion in Quran midrashists early on. Was it Abraham sacrificing Isaac or Ishmael? And eventually they decide it's Ishmael, but there's a long discussion over hundreds of years about that. So thank you for bringing to light a lot of those parallels. And I'll just highlight a couple more, and then let's get back to this question of why on Rosh Hashanah. So both Hagar and Abraham are unmoored, right? They're physically in the desert. We hear Hagar is wandering around in the midbar of Beersheba. Abraham is 3 days away from his home, out walking, and this idea of being having to go away from what is familiar and what is known, and that being a precarious place, not knowing what will happen, I think is important as a setup here. Both parents are alone with their one child, right? As they know it. At this point, Abraham doesn't necessarily know if Ishmael is still around. We hear that Abraham leaves the servants behind. Hagar is banished with her one child. They are both in the worst possible scenario, the death of their beloved child. And as we hear in the description of Isaac in the first verses, take your son, your child, your only child, your beloved Yitzchak, right? There's a an emphasis there. And this is not just their child, this is their future, this is their legacy. This is the promise that they've both heard already from this divine messenger, this malach, that this child will be the seed of many, a sure future. And it just strikes me, what you hear that promise, and then you hear, take your child and sacrifice them, or Hagar sees that her child's about to die. What does that do to one's sense? If they ever did believe this promise, I mean, we don't know they believed this promise, but the rage, the confusion, like BS, what is, calling the BS, like, what is this? How is this possible that this promise of this child bringing living into the future, and now it's being taken away. There's this sense again of vision and inability to see, and that it's only after the possible death of their child has passed that they are able to see. But then once they're able to see an alternative, a ram to sacrifice or a well from which to draw water, as you talked about. And the idea that an angel, that a divine being, an angel of Adonai, is needed to stop the death of their children, both of them, because they don't have enough agency or capability, right? They need this external sort of thing from outside of them, is so critical. So in many ways, they are parallel stories. Both are being tested. Hagar's test is carried out by her human agency. Abraham's is initiated by God in the first verse. After all these things or words, God tested or tried Abraham. And why they're being tested is never made explicit. And it just makes me feel like, life is sort of like that. We sometimes see difficulties in life or tragedies as tests, not tests to fail or pass, but times in which we confront in a real way the limits and the possibilities of our strength or our forbearance or our energy to keep living. We might wonder why we, or somebody we care about, is being tested, even if we don't believe in a tester. And that's the piece that always gets me. Even if we would never say, yes, there's a plan and this is a test, we can still feel tested. And what exactly is being tested in these narratives? Hagar and Abraham's bonds with their children, with the divine, with their very ability to see a future. We can call it hope, we can call it faith, whatever we want, but it's the strength and the vision to imagine a future and act toward that understanding. And one profound difference also sticks out to me as well. Hagar is witnessing and complicit in her child's near death through a kind of passivity and despair. She gives up. She casts her child away under a bush, sits at a distance, can't find it in herself to take a different kind of action, as you talked about. So it's easy to judge that, but having some rahmanis or compassion for Hagar, or I think what we're talking about today when we talk about trauma-informed, we need to remember that Hagar has been a slave. Hers is the action and the inaction of one who's been treated harshly, who has been made to feel that she doesn't even have the right to exist. And she enacts that sense of disempowerment in her stance of giving up her son's life, her future. She can't fathom the future. She can't see past this current trauma. Abraham seems much more empowered. He takes action. He answers the divine request, getting up early, without hesitation. The text tells us he wakes up early the next morning, and all the verbs that follow are a quick succession, decisiveness. He saddles his donkey, he takes his servants, he splits the wood, he arises, he goes off to the place that God has instructed. All of these active verbs. But Abraham's fervency has this kind of rigidity about it. He's stuck in this active posture. The classical midrash about why the malach must call out to him twice to get him to stop, and the others that I mentioned, that he can't even withdraw the knife. He can't see any future. His single-mindedness blinds him. His discipline and his forward-moving energy have rigidified him and made him myopic. And that brings me back to this question. Why do we read these two stories on Rosh Hashanah? Something that Noor Awad said last weekend points in this direction for me. Noor, who was with us from Roots, a Palestinian-Israeli initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation, said, the person who has hope will take responsibility. Neither Abraham nor Hagar can truly take responsibility in these narratives. Both are hobbled by their respective blind spots. They're stuck in their extremes, opposite ends of the spectrum. The one who seems to give up quickly, doesn't feel she can influence anything, just tries to avert her own pain, tries to survive very little agency, and the other one racing forward, even toward his own destruction without questioning, without any reflection. Seems like a lot of agency that Abraham has, but really he has no choice. Neither has he a glimmer of hope to draw upon. Both need second chances. Abraham needs the Malach to call out twice. Hagar encounters this divine angel twice. They are both not so quick to change. Both need practice in this changing and reorienting. And this is the nature of tshuva, turning, reorienting ourselves away from our chetim, literally derived from the Hebrew root to miss the mark or target. When we reorient our aim, but we have to reorient our aim so that we can make our target, whatever it is. This is tshuva. And how often do we miss the mark or enact a sin, as it's often translated, unwittingly, because we can't see clearly enough to know that we're about to miss the mark? Or to use Joey's image from yesterday, we don't even dare to look behind the mirror and imagine another perspective. Or to work this archery analogy, how often do we miss the mark because we don't know where to aim? Or how far back to pull the arrow, right? Anybody who's done archery, you do it too much, right? And it overshoots. Do it too little and you don't make your target. Hagar couldn't put in enough effort, and Abraham's zealousness, his unbridled effort, almost kills his son. So this makes me think about tshuva and real and lasting change, as we were hearing about earlier. Change is unlikely to happen with too little effort and agency, and sometimes too much under the spell of commitment, driven commitment, might create change, but not the kind of change that brings more capacity for understanding and love. So a middle path is needed. Agency and effort that also have space for reflection and humility. So maybe there's also something about the near death of one's beloved, of one's future, of one's identity. The test that both Hagar and Abraham, not to mention Isaac and Ishmael, undergo that points toward tshuva. Perhaps we must envision or have the literal and figurative ability to see clearly in order to bring on the end, the death of certain habits or ways of being, ways of thinking, ways of interacting with the world to make real change. And that's, I think, what the process of tshuva is about. It's encapsulated in the structure of these holy days. It's a gift, but with a demand attached. Here's a time to deliberately stop, to wipe away the schmutz from our glasses in order to see clearly what's really happening now, but also taking the collective strength that we both give and receive by being here together to see a future, to have a vision of a future for each of us and our world. This is the kind of tshuva, the reorienting, the turning, that can help us see a glimmer, even a small one, of some kind of hope, so we can take responsibility for these, our precious lives.